Well, there's a lot of contributions, and if you look at his body, there's so many things that you could focus on. But the thing that I like to focus on with Miles is how he really was aware of the connection between jazz and the popular music of the day. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff he did, particularly in the '50s, where he was choosing tunes that you never thought could be done in a jazz way, like "Bye Bye Blackbird" or some of those songs that were just basically the hits of the day. And Miles always knew about the connection between jazz and popular music, and there's nothing like that. When people hear a song that they know and then they hear a jazz artist treat it, there's nothing like that because they know the framework, they know the song, so they can really understand what you're doing, and it helps them understand jazz also. If you hear Stella by Starlight on the radio as a pop song was it in the 40s or the 50s, and then you hear somebody like Miles do it, then you really understand jazz because you know the basic song, you know the lyric, and then you hear how they treat it. You don't have to go to college, you don't have to do any kind of course. You get it right away. And Miles taught me that. He was always really interested in pop music, and he was always trying to figure out how he could use it to kind of infuse his music with some kind of currency. And I thought that was really important, and it really struck me. And that's basically what I've been trying to do for my career.
How'd you get hooked up with Miles in the band originally?
I was a cat here in New York playing bass on different sessions and playing on records and playing in clubs, and Miles needed a bass player, and he asked his sax player Bill Evans if Bill knew any good bass players. So Bill recommended me. It was as simple as that. And Miles called me and said, "Show up in an hour at CBS." And next thing I knew, I'm on. I thought Miles was in retirement. He hadn't done a record. This was 1981. He hadn't done a record since the early '70s or the mid '70s. So I thought he was finished. And next thing I know, I found out he's not finished, and I found out that he's recording, and I'm recording with him. So it all happened really fast. I joined the band after that and stayed in his band for a couple of years. And I told him, Miles, I really like to try to spend more time in the studio and try to learn how to produce and try to kind of grow as a producer and stuff. And he was real supportive. He said, "I'd love to have you in the band and go on and do your thing. You have my complete support." And most people can't even imagine Miles saying anything like that, you know what I mean? But he absolutely was supportive of me in all that stuff. And a few years later, he left Columbia, who he'd been with for years. And he went to Warner Brothers, and I knew Tommy LaPuma at Warner. So I called Tommy and said, "Look, I heard Miles is coming over there. Would you guys be interested in any material?" And Tommy said, "Yeah, you have something?" I said, "Well, I have some ideas, Tommy sent me a tape of a George Duke song that Miles had been working on. Miles had been working with George. George had written something for him. And I heard it and said, "Oh, Miles seems like he's open to some, maybe a little bit more of a contemporary sound." Contemporary at that point being 1984, 1985, something like that. So I began to write this music. I called Tommy and said, "I have some songs." He said, "Well, come to L.A." And I said, "You don't want me to send them to you?" He said, "No, just come on." So they came, they sent me, I was in New York, they sent me to L.A. I met with Tommy. I played him the cassette. He said, "Great, start." I said, "Okay, start what? Where's the band?" He said, "No, we want you to do it exactly like you did it on the demo," which was, I did it in my home studio. I was playing, programming, doing it myself. So he said, "No, we want it to sound just like that." So, I find myself, kind of layering a Miles Davis record, and I'm going, man, this is kind of strange. Miles has never done a record like this. But, this could be interesting. So anyway, I kind of went with it. A few days later, Miles finally showed up and listens to what I'm doing and says, "Yeah, I like it. Keep going. Call me when you need trumpet, Oh, and write another section for that part of it that needs a C section. And that's how the relationship, in terms of me and Miles working together in the studio, started. And, when I needed trumpet, I called Miles, and the first time was pretty difficult because it was difficult for me because it was intimidating. Miles is standing with the trumpet, and he's sitting there looking at me for direction. So the first couple of times, I just let him do whatever whatever he could get to. And eventually, he stopped the music and said, "Look, you have to tell me what you want me to do. This is your music, and you gotta give me direction." So it was, it was kind of uncomfortable at first, but eventually I got comfortable because I realized if I give him some direction, he's going to ignore me anyway, but at least he knows what he's ignoring. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like if you give somebody a framework, then they have something that they can use as a springboard. So that's how it worked, and we actually got pretty comfortable making records like that. So we did Tutu, then we did a soundtrack for a movie called Siesta, and then we did a Martino. And so that was 3 albums, you know, and for Miles, 3 albums in the same mode is pretty much enough, you know. Then it's going to be time to change, and he was starting to look at hip-hop, and, you know, we had some discussions, and he had been doing some work with Eazy-E, and he was saying, you know, maybe you can contribute to some of this, but we were running out of time, and by 91, he was gone.
Now, when you were in the band, in the performance situation, can you share some of your observations about working with Miles on a live gig?
Yeah, well, you know, the first thing that you realize is that, the first thing I realized was that Miles is, you know, beneath that exterior, you know, he was a very sensitive guy. I mean, you had to know that just by hearing him play a ballad, that he couldn't have been all rough, you know what I mean? You can't play that kind of sensitive stuff and not have that inside you, you know? And I'd see it on the stage. You know, we'd be up there playing, and he'd be staring at us, you know, instead of staring at the audience, facing us instead of facing the audience. And, you know, to the audience, it looked like he was arrogant, you know, that he didn't want to acknowledge their presence. But to me, it was very obvious that he'd rather look at people he knew than look at 6,000 people who he didn't know. It was just more comfortable, and it was scary to turn around, basically. So, you know, you'd see things like that from this side of the stage that you couldn't see from the audience, you know. And he'd come up to me, man, during the piece, you know, we're playing, and I'm jamming with the band, and he comes up to me and says, "All right, all right." I go, "What you saying, man?" "All right." And, you know, everybody in the audience is trying to figure out what's he saying to Marcus, you know, what kind of genius knowledge is he imparting on the young brother, you know. And when I finally could hear what he's saying, he said, "Check out my shoes, man, these are nice, ain't they?" I said, "Oh, those are some nice shoes, man. Cicely bought them. What size you wear? I'll get you a pair." You know, and those are the kind of conversations that we're having. "Oh, by the way, you're sharp." Oh, man. I'm sharp. Okay. I got a tuner right here, man, that's telling me I'm right in tune. Miles is telling me I'm sharp. I better flatten my bass. I better go down. But it was, you know, he was a real human being, man. He was into life, man. He was into you. When he talked to you, man, he was watching your face. When he talked to you, man, he was watching the way your mouth moved. When you were walking, he was watching the way you walked. You know, he said, "Man, you walk like blah, blah, blah," you know. "You walk just like you play," he'd tell me, you know. Or he'd say, "Man, that cat over there looks like Ava Gardner," you know. "How does a musician look like?" "Look at his face," you know. But he was a student, man, of life and people. And Wayne Shorter's the same way. And you begin to realize that those are the kind of musicians who can make you feel something when they play music, because they understand humanity, you know. They understand food. They understand sex. They understand life, you know what I mean? They understand what motivates people, you know. Not that Miles really probably consciously thought about what motivates people, but he knew what motivated him. And that's what came through his music. And that's why we all felt it.
In terms of the gigs, how did you receive, were there a lot of rehearsals? Was it an intuitive kind of communication about the music itself?
In terms of the gigs and the rehearsals, it was real intuitive. There was no real direct, you know, instructions at all. Which, you know, when you're in, you know, when I showed up on that first date, you know, he said, "Look, this is what I want you to play." He played F sharp and he played G. He said, "Boom, boom." "Got it." I'm going, "Yeah, you played F sharp and G." He said, I said, "Is that it?" He said, "Yeah, let's go." So we're sitting down, and I've got 2 notes with which to kind of figure out what to do. So first I just play him. I'd wait a bar and play him again. Boom, boom. And he stopped the band, stopped the recording. He said, "Man, is that all you're going to play?" You know, this is my first time playing with him, first time meeting him. "Is that all you're going to play, just F sharp and G?" So I said, "Okay, we'll try it again." We tried it again. And this time I played F sharp and G and every other note on my bass in between. He stopped the band again. He said, "What the hell are you doing, man? Just play F sharp and G and shut up." So I said, "Oh, I get it." this is a test. I get it. So I need to ignore him, and I need to just play what's right for this music and ignore his ass, you know. So that's basically what I did, and we got through a whole take, and after the take, he gets on the mic and says, y'all play like a bunch of faggots, and then walked out of the studio, you know. But as he's walking out of the studio, I'm the last one near the door, and he's getting ready to go to the door. He looks at me and goes, and opens the door and goes in, you know. And I realized, man, he's putting us through what Bird put his ass through. You know what I mean? And there's legions of musicians who had to pay for what Bird and them cats did to Miles, because he put us all through it, you know. But the difference was, man, that there was real love. At least that's what I felt coming from Miles in terms of our relationship. I mean, he especially at first, he put us through a lot of stuff. He wouldn't tell us what to play. You know, Mike Stern asked him, Miles, what chord do you want me to play here? And Miles went to the keyboard with his palm. He said, play that. So Stern is like, okay, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. I said, Mike, that's not the point, man. You got to figure it out on your own. You know, you got to figure it out on your own. And, you know, it took us all a while to figure that out, that, you know. And then we started doing these gigs, and, man, and people started, like, railing on the band because, you know, they had such grand expectations for Miles, and what it turned out to be was musicians playing music, you know, so we could never live up to that. So that really kind of, I said, you know, to myself, you know, you just got to go for what you know. You got to play, make sure you feel it, and then let the chips fall, you know. And that's how Miles taught you, you know. You'd play. If you like what you play, he'd turn around and give you a nod. If he didn't like what you played, you know. So the rehearsals, you know, we go into after the first 2 weeks of rehearsals, we're feeling like we still don't know what we're doing. And we get on the stage that way too. I mean, our first gig was like, we still don't know what we're doing. But then he'd lead us with his horn. He'd just play a melody. You know, we don't even have a set list. He'd play a melody. Oh, okay, I see what song's coming next, you know. And you realize that he's leading you with the music. And that was really interesting to me because there's so many things, man, musically that you can get to if you don't have to talk about, you know. As soon as you have to put that stuff in words, then you screw it all up because the words limit you, you know. But if you just play something, man, you understand so much that you couldn't articulate, you know. So, I mean, I know with my band, you know, that's the way I communicate with them also, you know, and it's really, it opens up stuff so much, you know, because it's such a more complete way to communicate when you talk about music, is to play something, you know, play it a little softer and have the band listening carefully enough to realize that you want it a little softer, or play it a little louder or a little sharp, you know what I mean? Just all those things, man, the words really can't, you know, explain, you know. And if I sat there and tried to talk to the musicians about what I was trying to do in that little two-bar area, they'd never get it. But if you play, it's there. And that's what I learned from Miles, because that's how he conducted the whole thing. And if you listen to the stuff that we did in that period, there were no beginnings of songs, there were no endings. We started playing at the beginning of the set, and we stopped playing when the set was over. And Miles would just take you on a trip, you know. It was a real interesting way to make music.
Now we cut to the period when you were at the control panel telling Miles what to do. How did you communicate with him? Did you say, Miles, I want you to play such and such here, or did you just let him hear it, let him improvise? How did that go down?
Well, at first I didn't do anything. I just turned the tape recorder on and said like that. So he'd doodle around. And then he said, no, I need more structure than that. So eventually I began to write out melodies. And the first time I wrote out the melodies, I took time to make sure I phrased everything as Miles would phrase it. I wrote it out that way. And, you know, it took a long time to write everything behind the beat. You know what I mean? And then he said, no. Just write it right on the beat. You know, because if you write it behind the beat, I'm going to play it even more behind the beat. So write it straight. So I'd write these real basic melodies and then let him feel it out, you know. And then I'd say, solo here, you know. And say the keys changing here, you know. It was just he and I, headphones, you know. Just say, you know, stop. Okay, go. And then I say, listen, you know, listen to the ensemble here. React, you know. Because for me, what we were doing was more like I was an arranger, and I was setting this thing up for Miles in the same way that Gil did it, although the way Gil did it was much more organic. Basically what I was doing was laying out this thing that had no improvisation, but it was a set thing, but it had areas where Miles could kind of be Miles on top of it. So that's how we did it, you know, and I'd play him sections, you know, and I'd point to him, you know, and I'd say, listen to that, go, you know, and he'd do it. So we were doing stuff like that. And then sometimes there's a song, Mr. Pastorius, that I had written, and, you know, I had this thing with Miles where, you know, and Al Foster and I were always trying to get Miles to play 4/4 again. And for him, it was old, and he really wasn't interested. And I had given up the battle, you know what I mean? But I had written this song, Mr. Pastorius, and it was in a soft jazz feel, but I figured that maybe if I keep it with two with a backbeat, Miles won't mind, you know? And I had laid down the chords on tape, and Miles and I were sitting in the studio with him with his trumpet, and I had headphones, and so did he. And I had written out the melody for him, and I had written the changes above the melody just for myself. And then I had written G minor vamp for Miles, because I knew he wasn't going to be interested in playing changes in it. And he starts playing the melody, and instead of going down to the vamp, he goes back up to the top and starts reading the changes, just like he used to do back in the 40s and the 50s. It was instinctive. He wasn't even thinking, you know. He goes back up to the top. So I immediately signaled to the engineer to take the keyboard that I had just done with the vamp and say, kill the keyboards, listen to what he's doing. You know, he's playing on the changes. I had my bass. I just start playing behind him, into, kind of funky. And he's playing, he's going, you know, I play 4, you know. So I start walking, you know. And he plays chorus after chorus after chorus, you know. And I'm like, oh man, do you hear what this guy's playing, you know? He just keeps going, he won't stop, you know, like 7 or 8 choruses. So finally he's done, you know. And he said, how's that? And I said, that's cool, you can go. So he splits. I run on the phone, I call Al Foster, who has been my partner in trying to get Miles to do something like this. I said, Al, you gotta get to the studio now, bring your drums. So Al comes to the studio, and he's listening, he said, oh man, that's it, man, you did it. Put me in record now. So Al is, you know, as far as Al's concerned, Miles was right there in front of him, you know, when he was overdubbing his drums. And Al played, and that was how Mr. Pastorius came. Then I went back in the studio, redid the chords, and redid everything to support what Miles had done. And that's how it came. So it was organic in its own weird technological kind of way. 1 second.